So play the music right now?
Yeah, you're taking over. It's your show now.
Okay, thanks. Let's Hi, this is William Ramsey at William Ramsey Investigates. Welcome to the show. It's a 1-hour show that I'll be covering a wide variety of topics involving true crime, conspiracy, politics, hidden history, and a wide variety of other subjects. On tonight's show, I'm going to talk about my first book, Prophet of Evil, Halloween 9/11 and the New World Order. If you'd like to join in, you can send tweets to my Twitter account at occult 9/11, and feel free to send me any questions or anything like that while I'm going through the show. Thanks a lot to Ed Opperman for inviting me on to Awake Radio Station. I'm glad to be on any and all other stations broadcasting tonight. And I'll just go right into the material. Basically, I wrote this book. I never really thought I would ever be a writer. I didn't even think I'd be on a radio show for that matter. But 6 years ago, I was always a researcher. I was always reading. And I really was interested in 9/11. And when it first happened, I really thought the true story was the real story, that terrorists basically flew planes in and terrorized the United States. It took me a couple years to kind of figure out that story really wasn't true. And I could see that it was very fortuitous for certain elements within our society for that attack to happen, that the wars could bolster the military-industrial complex, certain political changes could happen during 9/11. And while I was just kind of reading through, I'd read everything I could. I was on all kinds of different websites and stuff like that, but I came across a guy by the name of Colonel May, and he had written a couple stories about the occurrence of 11s that were commonly, within these events, just the date of 9/11. And he seemed to think that there was some meaning there. There were also dates of events of these kind of terrorist attacks and other events. And I thought that was interesting because I saw that connection as well. I saw the commonality of this number 11. I really didn't know anything about numerology or really the occult for that matter. But I just kept reading. I would try to kind of find more numbers. I was seeing 11s, and I kept seeing 77s and other. I saw a band with the 77 in the background, and the numbers of the planes are 11, 77, 93, and 175. And so once I kind of saw that, I really, for some reason, I finally made going through all this occult stuff to Crowley, that Crowley's ideas were systematized, and 11 was really one of his prime numbers, the number of magic. And it really led me to kind of like, well, is there a correlation between Crowley and this event? And what I kind of realized after researching, I really just researched Crowley. I got every book I could on Crowley. I looked through all his online stuff. I read almost everything about the AA. I researched kind of his groups and really tried to kind of distill. And once I did that, I really realized his ideas. It wasn't just the numerology of 9/11, but his ideas were integrated in the events that happened after 9/11. The idea of kind of warfare, slave shall serve, and so I really, started putting stuff together, and that's why I really wrote the book. I think I really just wanted to show people that Aleister Crowley's ideas and 9/11 and the New World Order kind of fit together, and these were kind of elitist ideas like Crowley was, and so that's really why I wrote the book. And just talking about Crowley is that, like I talked in my earlier show with Ed, he was born in 1875. He died in 1947. He came from a wealthy banking family, a wealthy brewing family that brewed beer, the Crowley beer. There's still kind of bottles out there with the Crowley label on there. And he was lucky enough. He was very intelligent. He actually wrote an autobiography. And his autobiography was really indicated his early life. So he talked about skinning a cat from an early age. He just wanted to do it. He wanted to skin a cat to see what would happen, and I included that in my book. And he talks about it kind of in this detached way of somebody who is kind of like a scientist or something. He says, I've been told a cat has 9 lives. I deduced that it must be practically impossible to kill a cat. As usual, I became full of ambition to perform the feat. I therefore caught a cat, and having administered a large dose of arsenic, I chloroformed it, hanged it above the gas jet, stabbed it, cut its throat, smashed its skull, and when it had been pretty thoroughly burnt, drowned it and threw it out of the window, that the fall might remove the ninth life. In fact, the operation was successful. I had killed the cat. I remember at the time that I was generally sorry for the animal. I simply forced myself to carry out the experiment in the interest of pure science. So it kind of showed Crowley's detached brutality, really. And he also, in early life, and it might have affected his personality, he blew up a chemistry kit. He made a homemade bomb and blew himself up and went into a coma. If you see kind of like the picture of Crowley, there's kind of a famous picture of him. I included on the cover of Children of the Beast. You can see that his face is pocked. And some of those pocks are from the damage that he did when the bomb blew up when he was a kid. But it was he says, the explosion had been devastating. The windows were smashed for a long way around. Bottles in the chemist shop on the railway bridge, a quarter of a mile or more away, rattled, though the passage of trains had no such effect. Strangely enough, I was the only person injured. Throughout, I enjoyed the episode. I was the hero. I had made my mark. So he's kind of proud of it. But he grew up in an early kind of, it was called the Plymouth Brethren, but he was a subset of the Plymouth Brethren. It was called the Exclusive Brethren. And his parents were very religious. His dad was a pamphleteer. His father would go out and give religious pamphlets, Christian religious pamphlets to people, wayfarers, and talk to them about the gospel. And according to Crowley, he really admired his dad. He really liked his dad. Unfortunately, his father died when he was 12 or 13, and he was left in the care of his mother and uncle. And he really didn't like his uncle, and he thought his mom was a very shrill Christian. He writes about her in his book, The World's Tragedy. He talks about her, cold-boiled Jesus. That's all she talked about. And it really affected him. I think that it really drove him away from kind of Christianity and the gospel. He really but he did read the Bible. He was actually a very prodigious scholar. He really was a scholar of the Bible. He wrote books on the Bible, tearing it apart, not bolstering it. But he said he was really into, and this is kind of the interesting aspect of Crowley, is that he integrated a lot of the symbology of the Bible, particularly the book of Revelations, into his philosophy. And so you'll see in some of his rituals the marriage of the beast and the scarlet woman. And that comes straight out of the book of Revelations. He talks about it in the third person. He says, he was fascinated by the mysteriously prophetic passages, especially those in Revelation. Christianity in his home was entirely pleasant to him, yet his sympathies were with the opponents of heaven. He suspects obscurely that this was partly an instinct of the love of terrors. He preferred the dragon, the false prophet, the beast, the scarlet woman, as being more exciting. He reveled in the descriptions of torment. One may suspect, moreover, a strain of congenital masochism. He liked to imagine himself in agony, and particularly he liked to identify himself with the beast, whose number is a number of a man, 666. So that's why he referred to himself all through his life as Aleister Crowley, the Beast 666. So it's kind of a fascinating insight into him. But after his father's death, he kind of he really rebelled, and his mother called him the Beast too, by the way. And so that was also a name of something that his mother said. But he said, in the change of his religious outlook, he wrote, "Indeed, my falling away from grace was not occasioned by any intellectual qualms. I accepted the theology of the Plymouth Brethren. In fact, I could hardly conceive of the existence of people who might doubt it. I simply went over to Satan's side, and to this hour, I cannot tell why. I was not content to believe in a personal devil and serve him in the ordinary sense of the word. I wanted to get a hold of him personally and become his chief of staff." So that was a quote that I referenced in my conversation with Ed Opperman earlier. So you can pretty much tell that he identified with Satanism, and he wasn't somebody who was kind of casual about it either, like some people talk about a dabbler or somebody who wasn't serious. But it's pretty clear from his writings and his opinion that he really was. So, in his young life, he actually endured some pretty brutal discipline at his schools that he went to. He went to upper class schools, but he unfortunately just got beat up all the time by other, he's basically bullied by other men, and the masters of the school also gave him a hard time. He remembers one licking at God, he says, on the legs because flogging on the buttocks excites the victim's sensuality. 15 minutes of prayer, 15 strokes off the cane, 15 minutes of prayer, 15 more strokes, and more prayer to top it. So basically he was tortured. And, he said he looked back on it kind of sarcastically like it was all done in Christ's name, and that probably further stoked his fires of hatred against Christianity, is that these people all did it at Christian schools. He actually had a really serious decline in health, that he almost died. He was sent home, and for the rest of his life he was basically taught by in-house teachers. So at an early age he also became interested in mountaineering, and that was like one of his big drives in his whole life was mountaineering, and eventually in his life he would travel to India and try to scale Kanchenjunga, which was one of the biggest mountains in India. It's kind of an interesting element of the story. But in 1895, Crowley passed the demanding entrance exams required to attend Trinity College, Cambridge. And when he got in, he basically was a member of kind of an elite. He said that he was in the place where Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton, Bertrand Russell, and Charles Darwin all went to school. So he felt pretty positive. Although he said that, kind of wittily, he said that he was mostly surrounded by a more or less happy, healthy, prosperous set of parasites, which is kind of an interesting, peculiar outlook. But he said, nothing to him was worthwhile but a thorough reading of the great minds of the past, or it's very rare that I got to bed before daylight. So he was really just reading feverishly. And he also became a chess player, so he was not only just a mountaineer, but also a chess player. Really good. He said that he really could beat anybody at that time. But he said that the spiritual turning kind of took place during that time. And he feverishly began to start researching magic. He really didn't go the Christian route. But he said, the forces of good were those which had constantly oppressed me. I saw them daily destroying the happiness of my fellow men. Since, therefore, it was my business to explore the spiritual world, my first step must be to get into personal communication with the devil. So that's another quote, a direct quote from Crowley about his devil worship. It wasn't some kind of, mysterious kind of interest in the occult. So he really sought out and found all these kind of esoteric books, these occult books. One was called the Book of Black Magic and Pacts. Another was Cloud Upon the Sanctuary. And really kind of explored all of that. That was kind of like the first elements of his homosexual life. He became interested in, homosexual activity. He said, in practical life, I was still passionately engaged in cleansing myself from the mire of Christianity by deliberate acts of sin and worldliness. I was so happy to be free from the past tyranny that I found continual joy in affirming my emancipation. So he really saw this, it's just another theme of freedom that rolls through Crowley. He really wanted to be as free as he could. So, it is interesting how this kind of element of freedom kind of rolls through his teachings and everything he believed. And it is remarkable. Let's see. So, he basically kept to himself. He also, talked about mountain climbing. He went everything, and that's when he really started his, he talked about writing. He really started doing his poetry. His first one was called Asaldama, A Place to Bury Strangers In. The other was White Stains. And White Stains was kind of within the late 19th century poetic culture. He wrote within this kind of darker style. But the way that White Stains it went from this kind of sacred literature into prose was worse and worse. It really got uglier and uglier. And basically involved bestiality, pedophilia, necrophilia, and coprophilia. So he would juxtapose these sacred themes with this kind of perversion. And these were kind of an underground book. White Stains was published in a very kind of, small print elements in these old printing companies, and small publishing amounts, like maybe 100 or 200 books at a time. when he was young and at Cambridge, he met really two people that influenced his life. One was Gerald Kelly, who he remained friends with. Gerald Kelly was kind of an interesting character. He was friends with a lot of Crowley's friends, like Somerset Maugham, who was also friends with Ian Fleming. So a lot of these guys knew each other. They really followed each other. And Gerald Kelly's wife, or sister, would become Crowley's wife and would be with him when he found or wrote the Book of the Law in 1904. So that's kind of, that element is coming up. He also met a mountain climber by the name of Oscar Eckenstein. And Eckenstein would be kind of his mentor. And he's kind of like, like I talked about in Ed's earlier interview, he was still, Eckenstein and Crowley shared a passion for the writings of Sir Richard Burton. And Crowley wrote, Sir Richard Burton was my hero and Eckenstein is modern representative so far as my external life was concerned. And during that time, there was all kinds of a mystical kind of flourishing that was taking place in England and Paris, England and France. And, Blavatsky was publishing a lot of materials. A lot of information was coming to England from the East. A lot of secret knowledge and a lot of Eastern traditions were starting to kind of percolate back to England from the colonial lives. And one of the writers at that time that influenced Crowley was Eliphas Levi. His real name was Alphonse Louis Constant, but he wrote books like Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, The Key of the Mysteries, and these were things that Crowley basically built on. But the real change in life for Crowley took place when he joined the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn was a post-Masonic ritual magic group. It was formed in 1887 by esoterically inclined Freemasons and Rosicrucians. The founders were Samuel Liddell Mathers, William Woodman, and William N. Westcott. And they wrote books, and this is kind of where Crowley drew from 11. There was a book called Numbers, Their Occult Power and Mystic Virtue, and talks about 11. 11 seems to have the type of number with the evil reputation among all peoples. The Kabbalists contrasted it with the perfection of the Decad. And just as the Sephirotic number, this is all Kabbalistic terms, Sephirotic number is the form of all good things. So 11 is the essence of all that is sinful, harmful, and imperfect. With the 10 Sephiroth, they contrasted the 11 averse Sephiroth, symbols of destruction, violence, defeat, and death. So not positive at all. But there was a kind of a grade system, a magical system, and Crowley really wanted to ascend up this kind of grade system. And his mentor was a guy by the name of S.L. MacGregor Mathers. And MacGregor Mathers was a magician of some repute, and Crowley really respected him for a while. Eventually, he kind of passed him over. But MacGregor Mathers was the kind of guy who would go into old libraries and try to dig up old tombs and translate them. He was a translator of the Kabbalah and the Goetia. He wrote a book called The Kabbalah Unveiled. And he believed in the secret chiefs, kind of like some of the other occultists of that time, Blavatsky and these secret chiefs. He actually claimed to be in touch with them. So he says, my physical encounters with them have shown me how difficult it is for a mortal, however advanced, to support their presence. I felt I was in contact with a force so terrible that I can only compare it to the shock one would receive from being near a flash of lightning in a thunderstorm, experiencing at the same time, great difficulty in breathing. So it's interesting, too, a lot of these occultists all had, breathing problems. Crowley himself had real serious lung problems most of his life. But MacGregor Mathers was really kind of Crowley's hero for a while in the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucianism. In 1898, Crowley was initiated in the grade of neophyte for the Golden Dawn and in Mark Mason's Hall, Great Queen Street, London. Crowley remembered, I had no idea that it was a flat formality and that the members were, for the most part, muddled, middle-class mediocrities. I saw myself entering the hidden church of the Holy Grail. This state of my soul served me well. My initiation was, in fact, a sacrament. So just shows how much Crowley really admired and respected a lot of these occult orders, and he took them very seriously, whereas others may not have. But he required, there was a ritual process that took place, and Crowley wanted to really kind of move up. He took the magical name Perdurabo. There's a book by Richard Kaczynski it's titled Perdurabo about Crowley, and its meaning is I will endure. And I think that it was an accurate meaning for Crowley, his life. He really had an incredible endurance in the occult. He was really something else. He stayed an occultist all the way till his death in 47. And I think that that is really the truth. So he actually alienated himself from the rank and file of the Golden Dawn, which included poet Yeats and other kind of prominent members of English society. And he basically had a conflict with Yeats about going up the systems or going up the grades. And they actually had kind of a battle. They actually had a battle, and the Golden Dawn after that battle was basically disbanded. And right before that time, Crowley went up to and bought the Manor of Boleskine in Loch Ness. There's always been a lot of talk about the Boleskine Manor. Jimmy Page bought Boleskine Manor. It just burned down. I don't know if they're going to actually rebuild it or not, but Boleskine Manor is in the far north of Scotland. Loch Ness runs north-south, and the reason that he went that far is he wanted to perform a magical book from the Book of Sacred Magic of Abramelin. And what it had to do is he was trying to contact his knowledge and the Holy Guardian Angel. And thereby he was supposed to invoke all of these kind of demons. And he basically said that these spirits came on, said, round and round our big library tramped devils of all the evening, an endless procession. 316 of them were counted, described, named, and put down in the book. It was the most awesome and ghastly experience I had known. So he definitely said that he invoked all these entities. And so he said it actually affected a lot of the neighbors up there in Boleskine. And even Jimmy Page said the house was haunted. A lot of the people who lived in Boleskine later said that the house itself was definitely haunted. And they were very uncomfortable, living up there. So if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to, you can tweet me if you want at occult911, or just look up William Ramsey on Twitter. If, you have any questions or anything, or want to talk or ask anything you want. So after Crowley was done and the Golden Dawn was kind of broken up, he really took off. He wanted to travel the world, and that's what he did. So in exactly 1900, he got on a boat and traveled all the way around the world. He became a member of the Masons. He said he was able to turn himself invisible at that time when he was doing some magical practices. And he climbed the highest volcanic peaks in Mexico, Colima, Popocatépetl, and Iztaccíhuatl. And so while he was there, his old buddy Eckenstein, they wanted to travel the Himalayas and climb K2. So they agreed that they were going to do it. And Crowley decided to kind of continue his trip from Mexico to El Paso, which he said embodied the coarse and brutal barbarism of Texas, and then to San Francisco, and then to Hawaii, from Hawaii to Japan, and then to Sri Lanka. And, he was writing the whole time and still writing prose and poetry. And while he was there, he met an old friend, Alan Bennett, who was a Buddhist who moved down to Ceylon, and they practiced Buddhism and yoga, and that's where Crowley really learned these practices from an early age. So, they tried to reach these different psychic states there. But while he was there, he talked about his future. He said, "My inmost knew that my destiny lay elsewhere. The lords of initiation cared nothing for my poetic fancies or my romantic ideals. They had ordained that I should pass through every kind of hardship at the hands of nature, suffer all sorrow and shame that life can inflict. Their messenger must be tested by every ordeal, not by those that he might himself choose." So he really had kind of a pretty intense view of himself. So Crowley, he kept writing. There's all kinds of books that came out. Crowley, and he's writing poems all the time. And in time, he he and Eckenstein decided to climb K2. And so they had to do make this route all the way through India, go to 21,000 feet, which at the time with no oxygen tanks was quite a feat. And they unfortunately didn't make it all the way up. And Crowley wrote of himself, wishing you a speedy termination of existence. He was very depressed. So he went back to Paris and ran into Somerset Maugham. And Somerset Maugham wrote about Crowley. Somerset Maugham was, like I said, a lifelong friends with Ian Fleming. When Ian Fleming had his first heart attack, Somerset Maugham was a person who called him and kind of nursed him back to health. Maugham wrote of Human Bondage and The Razor's Edge. The Razor's Edge is a great movie. If you get a chance, do watch that. And he wrote, one of his early novels was The Magician, featuring Oliver Haddo, who was basically Crowley. And Crowley was not too happy about his use. And he wrote about it in an article for Vanity Fair. He said, Maugham had taken some of the most private and personal incidents of my life, my marriage, my explorations, my adventures with big game, my magical opinions, ambitions, and exploits, and so on. He had added a number of the many absurd legends of which I was the central figure. He had patched all those together by innumerable strips of paper clipped from the books which I had told Gerald Kelly to buy. I would never suppose that plagiarism would have been so varied, extensive, and shameless. So he was not happy with his involvement in the Magician, and Maugham recollected to Crowley. Maugham talked about immediately dislike to him. He talked about Crowley, but he interested and amused me. He was a great talker, and he talked uncommonly well. In an early youth, I was told he was extremely handsome, but when I knew him, he had put on weight, and his hair was thinning. He had fine eyes in a way, whether natural or acquired or not, so focusing them that when he looked at you, he seemed to look behind you. He was a liar and uncommonly boastful, but the odd thing that he actually done some of the things he boasted of. At the time I knew him, he was dabbling in Satanism, magic, and the occult. There was just then something of a vogue in Paris for that sort of thing, occasioned, I surmised, by the interest that was still taken in a book of Huysmans, La Basse. Crowley told fantastic stories of his experiences, but it was hard to say whether he was telling the truth or merely pulling your leg. During that winter, I saw him several times, but never after I left Paris to return to London. Once, long afterwards, I received a telegram from him which ran as follows: "Please send £25 at once. Mother of God, I am starving. Aleister Crowley." I did not do so, and he lived on for many disgraceful years. Although Aleister Crowley served, as I've said, as the model for Oliver Haddo, it is by no means a portrait of him. I made my character more striking in appearance, more sinister, and more ruthless than Crowley ever was. I gave him magical powers that Crowley, though he claimed them, certainly never possessed. Crowley, however, recognized himself in the creature of my invention, for such it was, and wrote a full-page review of the novel in Vanity Fair, which he had signed Oliver Haddo. I did not read it and wish now that I had. I dare say it was a pretty piece of vituperation, but probably, like his poems, intolerably verbose. So that was kind of an interesting kind of connection between the two. One of the more famous writers of that era, Aleister Crowley. Crowley was still kind of traveling around. He was always moving. He's kind of a difficult person to kind of pin down. But he would move up to Boleskine, come back to London, go to Paris, and then kind of make the circle again. But he was always writing. Every time he moved, he would write. He penned a story called The God Eater, which, the basic narrative was that by the glorious act of human misery, the history of Christianity is secured. Hence, the appreciation of personality of Jesus is no excuse for being a Christian. And so it's kind of, it's another anti kind of Christian thing. And he was always going to Switzerland to climb mountains. In 1904, he was in Switzerland. He ran into a guy by the name of Clifford Bax, and he told Bax, "What is the date at this moment?" And he was told, and he said, and Crowley said, "In 100 years from this day, the world will be sitting in the sunset of Crowleyanity." Bax said, "He seemed to me a dangerous man, as indeed at one time he was, for he induced his disciples to experiment with drugs. And so, when he offered me a set of his works in exchange for my address, I contrived to get out of the bargain." So Crowley really saw this kind of idea to really create a religion. And in 1904, that same year, he traveled with his new wife, Rose. He married her in 1904, and they traveled the world. They went to Paris, Marseille, Naples, Cairo, and Egypt. They climbed the Great Pyramid of Cheops, and they slept in the king's chamber. And Crowley impressed his new wife, supposedly, by illuminating the chamber with astral light. Crowley remembers, looking about me, I saw that the king's chamber was glowing with a soft light, which I immediately recognized as the astral light. I've been accustomed to describe the color as ultraviolet. I saw that the king's chamber was aglow as if it was the brightest tropical moonlight. The pitiful, dirty yellow flame of the candle was like a blasphemy, and I put it out. The astral light remained during the whole of the invocation for some time afterwards, although it lessened in intensity as we composed ourselves to sleep. So they traveled to Ceylon. Crowley was still writing, and on the way back, that's really when the most important thing that he said happened to him happened, which is the receipt of the Book of the Law. He was March 16th, 1904, and his wife was kind of in a trance, and she said, "They're waiting for you." And he said, "Who's waiting?" And she said, "Who was waiting was Horus." So Matt Rose was very ignorant of magic or Egyptology, and so he really didn't know what that meant. They traveled to the Bulak Museum, and there was an artifact that they found that was really one of the more important elements of Aleister Crowley's life. It was the Stele of Revealing. It was the number 666. So it was something, and you'll see in my book, Children of the Beast, I include all these people holding the Stele of Revealing. Almost every character who admired Crowley had the Stele of Revealing because it was required that when Crowley's Gnostic Mass or some of the other rituals, you were required to have a copy of the Stele of Revealing and the Book of the Law in the ritual room. So Crowley set up a magical temple, and he invoked Horus, dressed in jewelry and a golden robe. He took a bowl of bull's blood and a sword, and he just basically invoked. And on April 8th, 9th, and 10th, 3 chapters of a small book were transcribed by Crowley. And it was by this beast called Awaz. He said that it dictated to him for 1 hour. And the voice was a rich tenor or baritone of deep timbre, musical and expressive, its tone solemn, voluptuous, tender, fierce, or aught else as suited the mood of the message. So, somebody is definitely trying to talk to him. And it's a pretty remarkable book. It has some very strange elements to it. But he says, I was proud of my personal prowess as a poet, hunter, and mountaineer of admittedly dauntless virility. Yet I was being treated like a hypnotized imbecile, only worse, for I was perfectly aware of what I was doing. My own unconscious was thus in alliance with Awaz. Taken between 2 fires, my conscious self was paralyzed so long as the pressure lasted. He says, we are forced to conclude that the author of the Book of the Law is an intelligence with both alien and superior to myself, yet acquainted with my innermost secrets, and most important of all, that this intelligence is discarnate. So, basically, within that book was the statement, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law is an 11-letter phrase. And Crowley, so there is this kind of idea goes all the way back to Sir Francis Dashwood, who was basically the Franciscan of Medmenham, which is known as the Hellfire Club. And in his abbey was the inscription Face que voudras, which is do what thou wilt. So Crowley thought very high of that, of the Book of the Law. He says, I, Aleister Crowley, declare upon my honor as a gentleman that I hold this revelation a million times more important than the discovery of the wheel, even the laws of physics or mathematics. Fire and tools of man-made plaster of this planet. Writing developed his mind, but the soul was a guess until the Book of the Law proved this. So it's broken up into 3 parts in accordance with the Stele of Revealing, because the Stele of Revealing has 3 gods, Nuit, Hadit, and Ra Horkut. It's kind of confusing. But there's a bunch of interesting statements. My number is 11, as all of their numbers who are of us. So 11 signifies, the kind of ideas or the people who are of the Book of the Law. And thus 11 is my bride is 11. So there's a lot of 11s in the Book of the Law. And it says, the word of the law is Thelema. Who calls us Thelemites will do no wrong, if you look close into the word. So that's kind of where the Thelemites idea comes from. It repeats the slave shall serve. But the third chapter is kind of the most vicious chapter where the god of Horus talks. There's all kinds of conquest and viciousness. A lot of stuff that Hitler kind of, said, a lot of stuff, success is your proof, so you succeed all the time. Here it is. Success is thy proof. Argue not, convert not, talk not over much. So, it's kind of like the idea that Hitler had, something that he had stated, to always have success. Them that seek to entrap thee, to overthrow thee, them attack without pity or quarter and destroy them utterly. Be swift as a trodden serpent, turn and strike. Be thou deadlier than he. Drag down their souls to awful torment, laugh at their fear, spit upon them. So pretty nasty stuff. Curse them, curse them, curse them. With my hawk's head I peck out the eyes of Jesus as he hangs upon the cross. I flap my wings in the face of Muhammad and blind him. With my claws I tear out the flesh of the Indian and the Buddhist, Mongol and Din. Blasphemy, Ompeda, I spit on your crapulous creed. So not really pretty stuff. So this is really where Crowley kind of took himself to be a prophet of the new aeon. And that's how I got the title of the book, Prophet of Eel. So he really kind of did do that work for the next 30 years at least until he got old and drugged out and sick. But he really was the head of this kind of, this new kind of religion. He said, I claim to be the sole authority competent to decide disputed points with regard to the book of the law, seeing that its author, Awaz, is none other than mine own holy guardian angel, to whose knowledge and conversation I have attained, so that I have exclusive access to him. I have duly referred every difficulty to him directly and received his answer. My award is therefore absolute without appeal. So it's basically a monomaniacal fascist or whatever, It's basically a dictator, according to, the book. And that's kind of the way he operated with everybody. He was domineering and overbearing, no doubt. So after he received this, he kind of kept writing and overcame, he kind of fought against his old boss Mathers. They went to court, and Crowley kind of turned away from that. He decided that it was time to go back to the Himalayas. He was invited for a trip to go to Kanchenjunga, which is the third highest peak in the world. And he was hoping he went with a kind of a multi-group, a bunch of French guy by the name of Jacques Guillarmond, and it was supposed to be, it's going to be an expedition, really. You had to kind of travel to get to the area of Kanchenjunga. So they had to go to Calcutta, then Darjeeling, and then go to a base camp. But it really didn't go well. They had tons of food and a big train with 200 porters. And tension grew between Crowley and other members of the expedition. He basically was, he has his part of the story, and they have their element of the story. So, Guillarmond was appalled at Crowley's brutal treatment of the servants. So he was like the kind of person who would whip the porters and stuff like that. At one time, one of the porters died on a treacherous series of steps cut into the ice by Crowley. And kind of the other members of the party said, oh man, this is not going to go well. And they kind of saw it. And then Crowley remarked about Guillarmond, I can't imagine what was torturing him, and I can't imagine even now. The kindest explanation I can give for his conduct is that he was mentally unbalanced. So, it wasn't going well. So they got all the way up to 21,000 feet, and half of the party left. So they took a lot of the porters. And as the deserters were going down to a lower camp, there was the snow drift that started an avalanche. And 4 of the people died in the expedition. And Crowley just sat in his tent. He really heard the cries, and they knew they needed help. But he didn't do anything. He really just sat there and sat in his tent. He said, he just ignored it. He said, there was furthermore no indication as to why they were yelling. They had been yelling all day. And he waited until the next day, descended and assisted in burying the 4 dead people. And at that point, that rumor got out that he didn't do anything, and earned him the perpetual enmity of all these people who were in the mountain climbing community. And he never went on any expeditions again. That was really the last expedition Crowley ever went on. So his callousness pretty much ended his time there. So he had made his way back to Europe and kind of kept writing. He wrote more poetry. He was constantly writing and doing magical practices. And he was always praying to Aiwass. He was constantly praying to this entity that visited him. And he then circumnavigated the globe again. He went to Vancouver, Toronto, Niagara, New York, and then to England. Unfortunately, his daughter died with his wife. He blamed her for exposing his daughter to the germs of typhoid. So then Rose started drinking heavily. She actually ended up with alcoholic dementia. And that happened to a lot of Crowley's friends and followers. A lot of these people ended up insane. They ended up in mental institutions or dead or committing suicide. That was actually another common result for his followers. And that's when he ran into J.F.C. Fuller. J.F.C. Fuller was somebody I talked about earlier with Ed, and Fuller became his kind of one of his first disciples, of many disciples who would come and learn from Crowley and then get the heck out. But he said of Crowley, the pen of Crowley was like that of Saladin, Swinburne, and Shelley, but is another cold douche of water to take the frowsy sleepers of the night and wash them from their gluey eyes, the nightmare of Christian supremacy, assuming there was kind of Christian supremacy. So there was tons of references to Lucifer in the book that Fuller wrote. And, unblushing, the old serpent rears its crest to the sky, unashamed. The beast and the scarlet woman chants the blasphemous litanies of their fornication, whatever. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff in there. Crowley was still writing. He was putting together what he called his holy books, which were books he said he received. And he said that this received book provided him with an honorific, VVVVV, which stands for V Veri Verniversum Vivus Vici. By the force of truth, I've conquered the universe while living, supposedly what it means. It's kind of interesting. That phrase is in Alan Moore's V for Vendetta. They actually include those V's in there. So it's kind of a interesting reference to Crowley. And so this is where he writes probably his most blasphemous book, The World's Tragedy. And The World's Tragedy is really just really vicious. J.F.C. Fuller said the copies must not be imported into England or America. So his intro is a dedication to Pan, a representation of the devil. And here's where he talks about his mother. And basically calls about the sexual freedom of the young men of England. He says, further, lest broad-minded prigs come to mash me by their aid, I shall fight openly for which no living Englishman dare defend, even in secret sodomy. So that was kind of Crowley's kind of view. And then he says in the book, I accept. He says, I therefore hold the legendary Jesus in no wise responsible for the trouble. It began with Luther, perhaps, and went on with Wesley. But no matter. What I'm trying to get at is that the religion which makes England today a hell for any man who cares to call it all for freedom, that religion they call Christianity. The devil they honor they call God. I accept these definitions, as a poet must do, if he is to be at all intelligible to his age. And it's their God and their religion that I hate and will destroy. Pretty vicious stuff from Crowley. This book is, you'll find no Crowleyites or anybody from any of his group to ever really acknowledge it like it exists. You can ask them a question, they'll just forget it. So it's really an insight into Crowley as far as I'm concerned. And it kind of, it promotes a lot of the myths about Christ. It promotes the idea that Jesus Christ was the Father was a Roman soldier by the name of Pantera, and that he wasn't a divine birth, and it's all there. And then Crowley picked up another hapless disciple after Fuller decided to leave, a guy by the name of Victor Newberg, and they actually started practicing the same kind of practices of John Dee and Kelly. And they went to the desert of Algeria to invoke this god Choronzon, or it's really a devil Choronzon. And this devil Choronzon was in one part of this it was in an oasis called Bou Sada. And interestingly, Timothy Leary and his buddy ended up in Busat as well in the 60s. And he acknowledged that Crowley and him were kind of overlapping people. And it's kind of interesting. But at the time Crowley was there to invoke this god, they engaged in homosexual sex and worked on these aethers. It's basically kind of an idea of the different planes of existence, I guess, would be a way to look at it. But what he did, he kind of made fun of Newberg. He dressed him like a lunatic. He said, I soon saw that Newberg, with his shambling gait and erratic gestures, his hangdog look, and his lunatic laugh, would damage me in the estimation of the natives. So I turned the liability into an asset by shaving his head except for 2 tufts in the temples, which I twisted up into horns. I was thus able to pass him off as a demon that I had tamed and trained to serve me as a familiar spirit. This greatly enhanced my eminence. The more eccentric and horrible Newberg appeared, the more insanely and grotesquely he behaved, the more he inspired the inhabitants with respect for the magician who had mastered so fantastic and fearful a genie. So they invoked this demon Choronzon, supposedly were attacked by it, and there was just another kind of experience for Crowley with these discarnate entities. I mean, it's hard to verify that he did, but that's what he writes about, whether it's the ones that were in Boleskine, the entities of Awas in Egypt, the Choronzon in Algeria. You know, it's remarkable. Crowley at that time, he had been in the occult for a while. He said, I possess more exalted titles than I've ever been able to count. I'm supposed to know more secret signs, tokens, passwords, grand words, grips, and so on than I could actually earn in a dozen lives. An elephant would break down under the insignia I'm entitled to wear. And I think that's pretty common. A lot of these secret signs, a lot of that they're out there. You can kind of see them around. But Crowley, it's kind of, this is like 1911. He attains the grains of Memphis and Mizraim and the highest part of Freemasonry. And he tried to actually change Freemasonry. He thought that the rituals were bogus. So he really tried to make them different. And he actually ran into somebody who would be a famous American film director by the name of Preston Sturges. And his mother was Mary Desty. And so at that time, Preston Sturges was in a boarding school. And Sturges actually remembered Crowley. And he said, his entire skull shaved except for one small tufted square in the exact middle of his cranium. He said of his Crowley, who his mother really was smitten with. The practitioner and staunch defender of every form of vice historically known to man, generally accepted as one of the most depraved, vicious, and revolting humbugs who ever escaped from a nightmare or a lunatic asylum, universally despised and enthusiastically expelled from every country he ever tried to live in, Mr. Crowley nevertheless was considered by my mother to be not only the epitome of charm and good manners, but also the possessor of one of the very few genius-bathed brains she had ever been privileged to observe to her work during her entire lifetime. Ask me not why. So it didn't really go well with both of those two. They didn't really like each other. And Preston remembered, I realized my mother and I were lucky to escape with our lives. If I had been a little older, he might not have escaped with his. So they really they fought against each other. It was during that time that Crowley wrote his book, 4, which was, he said, received from another entity. And in that book, the Book of Lies as well as what he wrote, there's 93 chapters, 93 being the number of Philemon and Agape. And you'll see that. So it was during that time, right after that, he ran into members of the OTO. And those OTO members asked him why he was stealing his ideas for sex magic. And he really didn't know what they were talking about, but they made him a member of the OTO for England. And that was his affiliation eventually. That was, I think, 1911. In 1925, he would become the head of the OTO. And it was then he started collecting Scarlet Women. These were women, ritual women who would help him with his ritual magic. And every one of his women would be branded on their chest, kind of like cattle, branded with a mark of the beast. It was kind of this phallic symbol that Crowley made up. And it was always very prominent. And, it's just, you'll see in my book, in my book, Prophet of Evil, you'll see all these women with these basically brands in the center of their chest that Crowley forced onto them. So Crowley at that time was in Europe, and eventually in 1914, he actually came to the United States and lived in New York. he sailed to the New York on the Lusitania, of all things, the ship that, when it sunk, started World War One, and he set off, and this was his time where he was really acting as an asset of British intelligence. And if you read Secret Agent 666, which is another book, can't remember the author at this point, but he basically shows that British intelligence knew Crowley was an agent, and it's pretty fascinating. So it says Aleister Crowley was an employee of the British government in this country on official business of which the British consul, New York City, has full cognizance. So Crowley he actually played the part of an Irish agitator who supposedly liked Ireland, and he would do these, and Crowley always did these ridiculous stunts, and one of his ridiculous stunts was tearing up his passport and declaring Irish independence under the Statue of Liberty. He took a boat over there, and he was going to get on the Statue of Liberty to do the whole public scene, but he didn't have the permit, so they made him sit in the boat and do it. But this episode was covered by the New York Times, and there's an article with Crowley doing that. So he says, and he used all this, haughty language. I unfurl the Irish flag. I proclaim the Irish Republic. Erin go bragh. God save Ireland. And, the Irish was always trying to break off from England. So it's then when Crowley kind of picked up his painting and really was hanging out and visiting people. He would travel to California, visit with the Theosophical Society. He would travel to Florida. And there's just tons of stuff that Crowley was up to in his books. I mean, in his life. I barely have gotten, to when he was about 40, and he still had a whole bunch of life to do. He traveled up the Hudson River and took 2 gallons of red paint and wrote on the side of the Hudson River, "Every man and woman is a star. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Both phrases from the Book of the Law. And he never really worried for money. He always had cash and always did stuff. And one of the things he wrote while he was in New York was his Liber 70, the cross of a frog ritual, where he would crucify a frog on a cross and just say nasty things to it. Jesus of Nazareth, how thou art taken in my snare. All my long life thou hast plagued me and affronted me. In thy name, with all other free souls in Christendom, I've been tortured in my boyhood, so I have thee, the slave god, in the power of the Lord of freedom. Thine hour is come. I blot thee out from this earth, so surely shall the eclipse pass. In the light, life, and liberty, he be once more the law of the earth. O Jesus, thine aeon is past. The age of horrors is arisen by the magic of the master of the beast, that is man. And his number is 666. Love is the law, love in the world. So, people who say that he was anti-Christian or not a Satanist are really just out. They haven't done the reading. It's pretty simple. So he endured in England. I mean, in the United States until 1918, until the war was won and the United States was involved. He actually operated as an anti-German agent. The German influence in the United States was significant in World War I. And their whole thing was to keep the United States out of war, and the British wanted to get the Americans into war. And the Lusitania sinking was what brought the Americans into war, and really was the kind of what started the process of the victory and end of the war, as the Germans kind of just were unable to fight, didn't have the resources to fight. So at this time, Crowley travels to the Abbey of Thelema. He goes to this place in central Sicily and starts up his magical group, brings 2 women, one woman from New York, and basically does all kinds of nasty stuff. He eats excrement and stuff like that. He writes about it. He just does really nasty things for supposedly magical benefit. And, one of his followers kind of came to visit him there, and unfortunately, his name was Raoul Loveday. And he died there. The rumor was that he died from drinking blood, but Loveday wasn't a healthy kid. He had an accident when he was younger, and I think it precipitated his illness at Crowley's magical camp. While he was there, Raoul and his wife Betty May, they were fitted with razors and informed they would have to gash themselves if they ever used the word I. Betty threw the razor away, but Raoul responded seriously to demand, and soon his body was covered with cuts. Betty believed this practice undermined his health. So this Betty May really was a benefit to being there because she provided firsthand accounts of everything that happened at the Abbey of Thelema, where a lot of the pro-Crowley people will never mention her name. They will never think she's legitimate. They will discount her, but she knew Crowley from London, England, and at the Abbey of Thelema. She never called him Crowley. She was afraid of him. She just referred to him as the mystic. So that's basically my book, Prophet of Evil, going into detail about Crowley. That's about halfway through. You can get the book at occultinvestigations.com. You can see the Kindle version is on Amazon, and the book you can buy from Amazon as well. But if you get it from me, you get a signed copy. And that's occultinvestigations.com. I'm on Facebook under William Ramsey. And if you want to get Children of the Beast as well, that's at occultinvestigations.com. And thanks for listening. I just wanted to give that overview of Crowley. Next week, I'm going to talk about Abomination. I'm going to cover the West Memphis 3 in detail, try to give an updates on what's going on right now, what's happened after the publication of my book, talk about some of the people who have investigated the West Memphis 3 and their conclusions, and just kind of tell you what's going on. So that should be interesting. Then the week after that, I'm going to go into detail about Children of the Beast, my most recent book that I published, and talk about all the people that have been influenced by Crowley and people that people that have influenced the culture. And I think you'll find that some people you haven't known, some people you do know, but you may not know the depth of their interest in Crowley, and that'll be it. And then I'm going to kind of move forward in this show and just investigate a wide variety of different topics, some of which I haven't really disclosed yet, but I have a wide variety. I have quite a few guests lined up that are interested in talking about certain subjects, and it'll just be an investigative online journalism show. Try to, get some topics that most people haven't heard of or haven't really covered, and see if we can do something interesting. So thanks for your time. I think my time is coming to an end, and you have a great night. Thank you very much.